This is the June internal customer meeting for the verified testing group. I'm James Heimbach, the product manager for testing, and looks like I have the first agenda item. This is more of a README or read only, but I'm going to vocalize a bit of it. There are some in the roadmap deck. Instead of going through all of the deck, we're going to continue with the just calling out changes of note. Feel free to jump in, ask questions within the deck, and I can definitely go through and answer those async. I did want to call out the currently active epics. That the three epics that are active are all in the code testing and coverage feature set or the category. The team is really focused on delivering an improved experience around the JUnit report. I need to actually look at the slide to tell you what the other two are, because I've forgotten already. Code coverage data for groups, that's providing historic coverage data for all of your projects within a group, so that builds on the code coverage graph that just released in 13.1. And then further enhancements really around usability, some of the data that comes through in that JUnit report. And those are issues that were reported by both external and internal customers. We're really focused on being able to dog food that report and make it usable for all of our internal folks at GitLab. And so we're focused on some things that were reported out of the quality team, some of whom are represented here today. So that is what's going on actively today in the group. And then our next efforts on code quality, again, focus on dog fooding. Looking back at the open dog fooding issue for the code quality feature, I pulled together some of the issues that were opened there into an epic that's really focused on moving that from a minimal maturity to a viable. Viable maturity is really based around the majority of users at GitLab are using the feature. And so we think that we've identified all of those issues that are preventing us from using code quality internally. And the team will be picking that up in the latter part of the year. So feel free to jump into those, leave comments, add questions, let me know. Otherwise, what I wanted to jump in and discuss synchronously today, because we have Ricky and Drew here from the testing team, along with probably some other folks I'm just not seeing, what kind of synchronous feedback besides what we've already seen in our feedback issue around the identified failures fast template does the team want to provide? What's the experience been so far? And kind of talk through what our next steps are in that effort, being kind of matching or getting to parity with the existing internal tooling. And there's an issue open for that in that TFF project. So I'm going to open it up to the floor for any synchronous feedback on the effort so far, what people are seeing. I know it's still early days, but wanted to make sure that we can have a conversation.
So I think from engineering productivity, we haven't had a chance necessarily to add it in to the GitLab pipeline. Albert detailed, I think in the first link that you have here, the inability to override portions of the configuration. So I'm looking towards the team for input on this to see if there's something that I'm overlooking. But our intent is to use it and at least be able to measure the things that I think Ricky, Drew, James, and I talked about, which is how often do we catch the failures that happen in the other pipelines? So at least run it alongside and start to have an idea of where we can look to refine that. The other thing that I think will help unlock a lot more value is being able to feed it maps, like a mapping of data. So replicate what we have for cost impact should be able to be done on that, but we're also looking, engineering productivity is looking towards using either coverage mapping or dynamic test mapping to try to refine more, like refine at least the unit integration specs that are run in a pipeline, more looking ahead to Q3. And being able to use the gem, or at least that pattern, would be phenomenal.
Drew or Ricky, do you want to poke at that or ask any questions while we're synchronous today?
I guess my initial thought there is, because I mean, most of what's in the gem so far it's heavily targeting like GitLab being able to use this internally. But for things like overriding configuration, we have an open issue about defining a mapping in, I don't know, a config file, you know, kind of some kind of route map style, simple YAML. And I'm wondering if that seems to everyone else like the most direct way to solve that problem more generally. Like I didn't want to build of the EE things directly into the gem because ideally we'll be able to, you know, sort of pitch this to CI customers and be like, hey, you could run CI this way. So does anyone have an idea of of something more direct to solve that, but also generic enough to sell as a feature? Or is the mapping issue probably the number one way to go for that?
I'd like to ask Kyle to
Sorry, yeah.
So what is the mapping feature or overriding config solve for you? Like, what's the problem with the gem today?
Yeah, so I'm not saying that there's a problem with the gem today because we haven't been able to try it. So that's thing number one that I would call out. If we're looking to replicate what we have today, right now we have a way to run FOSS tests based on the changes in the MR, and we're not able to configure the gem to do the same way, the same thing. So that's something I guess to consider, and I think providing that capability in a general sense will help unlock a lot more value for the gem that's used by that CI template. I think from my perspective, I do want to step back. We need to use the gem to be able to provide like the thing that's going to have the best value, but at the moment it would be having a configurable mapping would be the thing that allows us to leverage it more than what we're able to at the moment.
Sure. So it sounds like there's a blocker from you being able to use it.
I don't know if there's a blocker. It's more just a CI config. So we're not able to use the template as it stands, is my understanding. And I'll link to this. Albert had a comment in that first issue. I just want to add it to the agenda.
It'd be interesting to see what does the gem provide from a testing perspective today versus the internal tooling, and where's the gap there. That's what I think of first.
Yep, and that's what I suggested. So if we can't use the template, we should at least just take the content of the template and put it in as a job in the pipeline. So it can be, we can at least understand the benefits of the gem.
Yeah, so to be clear, there's two different things, right? There's the CI config template isn't usable because of not being able to partially override selective sections of it. That's one problem. And then the second problem is not being able to provide a config map for the test file finder so that you can allow it to do the EE FOSS test runs right now.
Yes, I agree. And I don't think, I think both have workarounds. Like we don't need the mapping to be able to see is the gem valuable. We don't need the template to change to be able to test out what the template does. We can just take the content and put it in. It's just prioritizing the work on our side and getting it. The action's on me. I don't think it's on the testing group, to be clear.
I know it's pretty early days because that just released like last week. It felt like an ideal, or not necessarily ideal opportunity, but it was our next opportunity to ask for feedback. So yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm understanding this correctly, but is the scope right now of what we have, like, does that just cover unit tests? And if so, like, do we need the mapping available to run the unit tests selectively?
See Drew thinking about that.
So right now I want to say it potentially covers more than unit tests. Right now, it's really only Rails RSpec tests. So anything that maps one-to-one from your app to your spec directory, it covers it. So right now there's an open issue that it doesn't cover request specs in RSpec even, because there's no app requests directory, right? It's that simple of a, is there something that exactly corresponds? Okay, we're going to run that. The configuration, like passing in a config to be able to make an educated guess to those paths, I think is the simplest option for extensibility to specify other kinds of tests and other files, you know, to whatever extent you want. But also, if something is a very common configuration pattern in a lot of people's config files, that's something that I would think we should roll directly into the gem and be able to do automatically. So people can do whatever they want, but we should try to make them do as little as possible. That's sort of my strategy for building the auto magic is, you know, anything we see that's really common or standard, we should try to detect automatically and do ourselves. So it might start in the configuration, and then I'd like to eat it and make it part of the gem. And I think it's mainly unit tests right now, and perhaps some other ones depending on your project.
Does that answer your question, Joanna?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the configuration thing's pretty powerful too, because you could even start to do things like, well, if any file in this directory changes, make sure you run this one test. And you could kind of make that mapping with kind of wildcards. And that way you could highlight, well, these files represent the most sensitive parts of our code, and we're going to always run these wide-reaching integration tests every time that those files are changed, and as kind of like that early warning thing. And I think that once you have that mapping too, it becomes easier to even fudge for other languages. So you could maybe start to point out how Go would organize its tests in the same directory. So if a file's changed and there's a file in the same directory that ends in _test.go, run that one. And then that could be like an easy, quick win that would just be the config, be a config.
Cool. Well, I think that covers my point on getting some feedback on that feature.
In the spirit of setting a due date, it might not be a few weeks until we're able to bring that in. So I don't know if we'll have feedback for you next week, but let's re-look at this in 2 weeks, if that's okay. Unless you need it sooner than that, I can look to deprioritize some other items. But
no, I think that's all right. The team is pretty full up on some other items now. We'll look to pull in more development work on the gem when we have more feedback internally. And I'll make sure this is on our agenda for next month when we have this call again. So quality folks, our internal team, our internal customers, what other problems are you having, or what other features should we look to start dog fooding next? This would be a great opportunity to talk about what's preventing us from dog fooding things like code quality or accessibility, web performance, usability, the visual review tools, things like that in your day-to-day workflow.
I will be honest that I am not as familiar with all of everything that testing has, so I need to read up a little bit more on it to provide good feedback. I'd look to the rest of the department to maybe provide better than that.
Couple things like the visual review tool. So we don't have anything within quality per se. Nobody's sitting down and running these tests manually to be able to go and look and compare. Possibly there's a way we could work that into our debug process, but then we're just talking about really using the review app to try to look at something specifically. Yeah, so I don't think for visual review tools, that's going to be something that we have. And from a team perspective, we haven't really addressed the issue of accessibility yet. So I think that's going to be something on our roadmap eventually. It has come up before in the past, but it's nothing current that we have right now, unless I'm mistaken, Kyle or Joanna. But I don't think that's anything we're looking at short term for us to try to work with it. Now, can we integrate that with some of our CI? I think maybe the accessibility is a possibility, but then for that, I think we still have a requirement on review apps, and I don't know if our stability there merits the accessibility testing part. I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that, Kyle?
Yeah, so I kind of made a general assumption that the visual review diffs and accessibility testing require a live environment to exercise something against. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, Visual Review Tools rides the rails of the review app. Lives in there. Accessibility doesn't necessarily require the review app, but you do need a live environment to go and scan. It makes the most sense in, as part of an MR that you are scanning the review app that you just built.
Yeah, so as Zeph kind of alluded to, right now review apps aren't being used at all on the GitLab project because of a security issue, which that's what engineering productivity is looking to remediate. The next thing that would hold us back from using that, again, is more of an internal thing where there's not seed data. So I can spin up a GitLab instance, but there's not a project to go look at. It would be very limited in the scope of how you could apply those testing tools with the current implementation if it was going live. So we have an issue that has not been prioritized of being able to provide more, I guess I should say, like more seed data, or at least the capability to load an environment with data. And that would be something that I think we'd want to look at how we can leverage some of these testing components after that.
The accessibility one is top of mind for me because it came up in the UX group conversation today. Sid asking about readability and accessibility. So potentially maybe the docs project is somewhere, or the handbook project is somewhere where we could dogfood this, especially if we added a readability component to the accessibility project to make sure that those docs or handbook pages are readable, at least human language wise, or English language wise, not human language wise.
Hey,
go ahead. Sorry.
Juan, I'm curious. Does UX? How much does UX dive into accessibility?
Can you explain a little bit more what you're asking?
Accessibility can cover lots of things about an app. Right. Prime example, somebody being colorblind. How does our app, so there are lots of predefined rules for accessibility that we can map against, which is what our tool does.
Got it. So
I just didn't know if accessibility is something that UX has really looked at, because from a quality perspective, we haven't really looked at it.
We do look at that very often, and like very diligently as well, but I don't think that we have anything like from like an automated perspective that it's checking on those things. Yeah.
Gotcha. So I wonder, Kyle, if we could possibly even add a manual action to our pipelines that would give somebody in UX, if they wanted to go look at accessibility, an option to just click the button and run the test and see. I don't know. It's a thought.
You could make it a manual stage after something goes to staging even, and scan it there.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think in the MR pipeline, we can at least add it in. I would need to look at how to configure it. It looks like you feed in a set of variables into it that have the URLs. So we can take a look at that.
Yeah, to make that sorry, go ahead, Kyle.
No, yeah, my apologies. The other consideration is just maybe even nightly pipelines or something like that on just GitLab, where we can, I don't know what we would do with the information. So like we have nightly pipelines that run on the GitLab project where maybe we can configure it to run against a few of the GitLab.com pages. Again, I don't know how actionable or what we would do with it, but that's something that could
I
be
think
done.
that would be like if from the UX perspective, if we have the data somewhere and we can track the data consistently through time, I think that will be very valuable. It will give us like something to look at and say like, hey, it's almost like code quality a little bit, like coverage, for instance. You know that if your coverage is going down, like there's something wrong. Like so. It will be kind of like the same thing, but for accessibility. Like we, as a team, we could look at that data and say, hey, it seems that we are becoming less accessible. What's going on. So it's that will be an interesting thing for sure.
The last question I have is, are there existing issues to dog food any of these features that I can at least keep track of or add some thoughts to, or should we
I was
create
just
some?
going to say, I think the next step is to create a dog fooding issue for accessibility where we can gather some of the feedback of what would prevent us from using this, or what is preventing us from using it, or what are nice to haves for the next steps. I was going to say, to make this really usable in a pipeline, having the changed pages feature, which is an open issue, would be really nice so that you can just scan for those. Barring that, just identifying some key pages that we want to say these are accessible pages, maybe something like some static pages in the sign-up flow or just the home page. Those would be a good first step. And then we do have an open issue for the next iteration or a future iteration on accessibility around tracking some sort of score over time. Right now, it spits out an HTML report that identifies individual issues, but we don't have necessarily that kind of letter grade or GPA grade that you might say, hey, our accessibility is trending up or down. It's just here's the issues and the URLs that we scanned for you. So those are a couple of things that come to mind. I don't think that those prevent us from using it today, at least to start. But those will definitely make it a lot nicer to make actionable internally. So I'll take as a to-do creating the dog fooding issue for accessibility. There is one open for code quality already. I don't know of one open for web performance yet. But I believe that we're already using that tool internally, and we've made some changes since I've started to web performance that in response to internal customer open issues.
Sorry,
I think
quickly, does anybody know off the top of their head if the handbook has a sitemap available?
Top of my head, no.
Our accessibility, the engine we use can accept a sitemap. And I think we'd have to update our project to handle it, but I think that's relatively straightforward work. And if we did, that would be I think that would get us fairly far on dog fooding accessibility for the handbook.
Looks like there is a sitemap XML file available.
It. Thank you kindly.
Today.
So if there's no issue for sitemaps not being supported and accessibility, we should open that, because we could do a lot of scanning really quickly.
My concern with that would be that's a lot of scanning really quickly. And a lot of the handbook pages are kind of very similar. So it might just be worth getting a few different, like maybe scan one page that adheres to each type of template in the handbook, as opposed to scanning all like 10,000 pages.
So there's an add-on feature that I'd really like to have, where if we could, I think there's a more intelligent way that we can group some of the violations to help sort of display severity. If somebody runs, right now, you can see all these new, like in a merge request diff, you could see all these, new accessibility issues. But if the thing at the top of the list is like, you introduce this new accessibility issue, and it occurs on 10,000 pages on your website, like, okay, that's pretty severe. So I'd sort of like to start with a sitemap, a full site scan, and then sort of think about, okay, how can we make it nicer to run a huge scan to, you know, get people into this.
Yeah, I guess my concerns are more on like the infra side. If we start spinning up a bunch of CI runners that make 10,000 curl requests against public things inside of a pipeline, the infra team might get a little bit upset.
One CI runner that sends 10,000 curl requests.
At least the first time, right? Once we have the change pages, that'll go down really fast.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will get the
Thanks.
dog fooding issue open, and I'll poke around with some folks and see what we can do about getting it into the pipeline for the handbook. I think it'd be interesting to at least run it once and see what we find. And walking through the report with some folks would be an interesting exercise, I think, to say, hey, how is this actionable? How is this not actionable? How can we make this experience better?
And I was just going to add, like, I think the simplest iteration we can do for the GitLab project is like check the sign-in page, check like a repo page that's publicly accessible, check like an issue, an MR, like some of just the heavily used features. I imagine accessibility testing. I'm not sure what you've heard from customers, but the company I came from, now it's a year. Wow, it feels like it hasn't been that long. Large insurance carrier, they were going through like a large effort to meet accessibility requirements for all of their public-facing site, like millions and millions of dollars. So having a tool for this, I imagine, would be a really good selling point of the group, and being able to use it and provide that feedback will only make it better.
Yeah.
Pick a sign up flow where marketing is doing A/B testing. See if it helps our conversion rate.
All right, well, I don't see anything else in the agenda today. Yes, nope. Thank you, Ricky and Joanna, and whoever else was helping take notes while I was just rambling and standing here. I really appreciate it. I'm the worst at taking notes in my meetings. All right, well, we'll give everyone some time back then if there's nothing else to discuss. And we'll look forward to feedback on a couple of these different issues when we meet again in about a month. All right, thanks
James.
everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya. Thank you.